Okay, right.
It's like that without any seeing and no absence.
My daughter is racing today in the Kingston
Racing what? Running
place, regatta.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
great.
All right, l'chaim, everyone.
Running.
Right. So this week got very interesting, and it's about the evolution and the story of the Jewish nation as a whole, how we ended up where we are today in the diaspora, spread across the world. How did we get here? And the connection is actually a twofold connection. Why are we learning about this today? Number one, yesterday's parsha was Masseh, the journeys. It speaks about the 42 journeys that the Jewish people journeyed in the desert for 40 years. It says every single journey, they went from here to here and from there to there. And each one, it's recorded exactly the different journeys that they went to. Some places they were there for only one day. And even if they were there for only one day, they built up the tabernacle as if they were staying there for 10 years. They settled there with a permanence. In some places, they stayed there for a long time. Each time, whenever the cloud started going, they knew it was time to travel to the next location. They moved, they counted. It's all about the journeys. And in a way, the Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of the Hasidic movement, he said that this story, why does the Torah have to mention, like they went from here to there and there to there? Because that story of the Jewish people's journeying in the desert is in a way almost like a prototype for the story of the Jewish people as a whole, that the Jewish people are going to go through all of these journeys in the future. And we've gone through many journeys. And also, every individual in our life, we also go through 42 journeys from when we're born till we pass away. Different stages. Some stages can be longer, some are shorter. And we have these different journeys. In addition to that, also now we are in the period of mourning of it's called the 3 weeks. So this is in between the 17th of Tammuz, which was when the Babylonians penetrated breached the wall of Jerusalem, and then eventually that led 3 weeks later to the destroying of the temple. Both the first temple and the second temple were both destroyed on the 9th of Av, which is coming up very soon. So in these 3 weeks, we mourn the destruction of the temple. And obviously, the destruction of the temple is what led to the Jewish people being put in exile and eventually the diaspora. So that's why we're also learning about the story. But, you know, the question is, beyond this just being the tragedy of history, is there a deeper meaning to why history had to unfold in the way that it did? Or, we'll see that there's more to it. And we'll also get a bit of a glimpse into the different Jewish communities as they spanned across centuries and across continents to get a glimpse into how the Jewish diaspora evolved. Very, very fascinating. And I have to say myself, I've learned a lot of things myself learning for this, preparing for this, which was very, very fascinating. But we all have to start, we start everything at the very central point, which is, so we got the 42 journeys, but it all starts with the anchor. So a ship can travel in many destinations, but it has the anchor, and our anchor is in the Holy Land of Israel. That is our land. What is the origin of our connection to the land of Israel? It goes all the way back to Abraham, where God promised Abraham, to your descendants I have given this land. We see in Genesis, God said, he told Abraham to travel. He said, leave the house of your origin, where he grew up, and go to the land that I will show you. That's when he was 75 years old. He had to leave everything behind, his whole family. He grew up in a town called Haran, which was modern day somewhere in Iraq or somewhere in that area. And God told him, just follow where I'm showing you to go. And he eventually brought him to Canaan, which was Israel. And then God told him, this is going to be the land that I'm going to promise your descendants. Then later, there was the covenant. Have you heard of the covenant? In Hebrew, it's called the Berit Ben Habitarim, which means it's a very fascinating story, again, also described in the Torah, where God made this covenant with Abraham. He made him cut up the animals in pieces, in halves, and then this divine revelation from heaven came down and went in between the halves. This is in the olden days, in ancient times, how people made treaties or covenants between two parties. Nowadays, we've got like a contract. You sign a contract that your two sides are agreeing to something. But a contract is more of like a transactional agreement where essentially if something happens, if the terms of the contract are breached, the contract is void. whereas a covenant anciently was something very powerful. It was a strong agreement in a way that there's nothing can breach or change or void this agreement. So God specifically uses the term, I'm making a covenant with Abraham, saying, so this is in 1.2, saying to your descendants, I've given this land from the river of Egypt until the great river, the Euphrates. This is the land of Israel, the land that God promised that belongs to the Jewish people. Now, what that means is, over the course of history, there were many, centuries and more that the Jewish people were expelled from the land of Israel and we weren't there. Sometimes there was a small population still in Israel. Sometimes there was larger population, but the Jewish people, as we'll see soon, the exact history, but ultimately we were expelled from Israel and we were put in exile. But the point is that even during that time that we were in exile, the land of Israel was still inherently ours. So say, for example, you've got this estate and there's the deed. And on the deed of the estate, it has your name. But then, you misbehave, you're being a cheeky child, and your father basically sends you out, you're not taking care of the estate. He says, that's it, you're out. But your name is still on the estate. Legally, it still belongs to you, even if you're not there for many years, even if you pass away and your children, your grandchildren, ultimately, it legally always belongs to them because their name is on the deed. Same way, Israel is the land that God made this covenant, which means that there's no such thing as if we sin, then it will be, the covenant will be, the promise will be nulled. No, it's a covenant and it's something which is everlasting. We say in the prayers, the Musaf prayer, which is the special prayer that we say only on the holidays. We say it also on Shabbat, a Musaf prayer, but in the Musaf that we say on the holidays, there's this passage here in 1.3. Stuart, you want to read 1.3?
Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land, and we were distanced from our soil.
So ultimately, we're saying this is the story: is that we had Israel, we had sovereignty with King David and King Solomon, as we'll see soon. But then we sinned, so there was the destruction of the temple, and we went into exile. But you see something very fascinating here. There's a little silver lining. You see, if you read deeper into the words, it says that because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. That means that even after we were exiled, it's still our land. And we were distanced from our soil. It means it always remained, even after we were exiled, it always remained our land and our soil, even when we were in exile. So this is the starting point, is to know that Israel is our land. The question is then, why, should we all go back to Israel? Why do we have the diaspora? But in order to understand that, we have to actually go a little bit further back to the very beginning. And so if Israel is our homeland, then why are most Jews everywhere else, right, including us here? So to begin with the beginning of the story, so Joshua brought the Jewish people into Israel. Moses, he died at the end of the 40 years of the desert. His punishment for certain things, he wasn't able to go into Israel. Joshua brought them in. Then they went through a period of about 400 years. They first had the Shoftim, which is the judges. This was before there was ever a king of Israel, but they had judges, and their job was to teach the Jewish people, but also to fight against the enemy in battles and such. The story of Samson. So he was from the judges. And then Samuel, the prophet Samuel, he appointed the very first king, which was King Saul, or Shaul HaMelech. And then after he died in battle, then came King David. King David, from him started the Davidic dynasty. Up until today, we have people who we know today, Jewish people who are direct descendants from King David. There was a promise. We say also in the prayer that in the blessings of the Haftorah, after we read the Haftorah on Shabbat, in that blessing, we say that the bloodline of David will never be and there were certain times in history when there were evil people who tried to completely eradicate every last descendant of King David. And there was one story, there was only one child left, and he hid in the temple for 7 years until he grew up, and then eventually he continued, and he had more children up until the famous Maharal of Prague, who lived 300 years ago. He had a family tree going back directly to King David, and then there are many, many descendants today who are direct descendants of the Maharal of Prague, who comes directly from King David, including actually the whole Chabad dynasty of the Chabad Rebbes. They're also direct descendants of King David. So King David, he was the first one to make Jerusalem the capital of the Jewish people. But he didn't build a temple in his times. His son, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, he built the temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, lasted for about 400 years, and then came the destruction of the first temple. Now,
But to build the foundation of it, which is the city of David,
yes, correct, which is
how the water will reach Jerusalem, like the temple and stuff like this. Are
yes,
you aware of it?
the what?
So without the city of David, water wouldn't be able to pump up. There's like caves from the city of David, which is the foundation of how water still today
Wow,
is pumped all the way up.
interesting.
It is sort of, and then the British Empire made it with pumps, like modern pumps, which are still, the ruins of them are still today, and then there are modern pumps today, but
Wow,
still in the same way, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it.
amazing. Yeah, I remember visiting the city of David. Yeah,
The builder of the second temple, which was
we'll get there. Herod.
Herod.
Yeah,
He actually was known in New York, should we say, killing children. His wife Miriam, I think,
Yeah, he was-
the bigot line. Her children before he married her. That's why he tried to slaughter them, because he thought they were the Davidic line.
Yes.
And they usurped him.
you're right. We'll get there soon. So
Yeah,
he wanted to sort of make good with the Jews after he was a very evil man. So
Yeah.
he decided to actually renovate the temple. So, but actually, before the first temple was destroyed, happened something a really big, pretty tragic thing, which was the 10 lost tribes. You familiar with the 10 lost tribes?
Mhm.
Okay, so what happened was, sorry, so to back up a little bit. So King Solomon, during his time, this was called the golden era of the Jewish people, where there was one kingdom of all the 12 tribes. King Solomon, the name Shlomo means peace, because in his days there was peace. He was so powerful, no enemies, no one wanted to attack the Jewish people. It was a very, very peaceful time. Unfortunately, his son afterwards was a bit arrogant, and he didn't have as much political power as his father did to be able to sort of have the respect of all the people. And he tried to keep the taxes really high, like his father did. And there was a bit of political stuff. People wanted him to lower the taxes. And that caused there to be a divide in the Jewish people, where there was 12 tribes, then divided into two kingdoms. Kingdom of Judah, which was just the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And they had the area of Jerusalem, including the temple. And then there was the cutoff. All the other 10 tribes, they had what was called the Kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom. And there was a lot of corruption going on. And in fact, they built rival temples because they didn't have Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. So the northern kingdom of Israel built these temples for idols. There was a lot of idol worship, a lot of corruption, a lot of the state of the people was very bad. It says that ultimately, now, so what happened? The king Sanherib was the king of Assyria. He came in, he was a very powerful king, and he conquered first the northern kingdom. And he had this very cruel tactic. It was like a military strategy that instead of just conquering the people, he would then take the people and disperse them in other lands in order that they shouldn't have a sense of like nationality, that they can have like uprising against him. So he took them and he just mixed up all the people. He put them in different places, so that way he would be able to maintain his power. And ultimately that led to the 10 tribes who are permanently, or actually we'll speak now what happened to them, these 10 tribes. So in Kings, this is in the Bible, it says that these 10 tribes, he dispersed them to, it says the locations in 2.1, to the river of Chabor and the river of Gozan and the cities of Media. But the question is, what exactly are those areas? So there's modern day, in the Talmud and commentaries and modern day scholars, they basically say this is somewhere in modern day Iraq, Iran, and Syria. So the 10 lost tribes are somewhere in that whole region. Now the question is, will they ever come back? Will the 10 lost tribes ever come back? So actually, it's as every good Jewish question, there's an argument. In the Talmud, there's an argument. So there's a verse that says that he cast them into another land as this day. So one rabbi says, what does it mean as this day? Just like the sun rises and when the sun sets, that's it. The sun sets and that day is gone forever. So too, the 10 lost tribes, once they were lost, they're gone forever. Comes the other rabbi says, no, Just like the sun after it sets, the next morning it rises again. So too, the 10 lost tribes, they went through a period of being lost, but they will come back. Ultimately, the commentaries explain that according to all opinions, the argument was only about that generation because they were wicked. Like we said, they did the three cardinal sins of murder, idol worship, and adultery. That's why the temple was destroyed. So therefore, that generation will never come. There's an argument whether they will have a portion of the world to come, whether they'll come back when Mashiach comes. However, their descendants, who didn't do any wrong, according to all opinions, they will come back. And the proof for that is that when it speaks about the coming of Mashiach, it speaks about Israel being divided back between the 12 tribes. All 12 tribes, not just two. So all the Jewish people today are only we are all descendants of only the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Unless you're a Cohen or a Levi, then you're from the tribe of Levi. But otherwise, if you're Israelite, like all of us here, then we're from the tribes of Judah or Benjamin, and all the other 10 lost tribes. So people have different theories, whether it's the Ethiopians or some other groups in Africa and who knows where. Sorry, what's your...
Well, I just wondered, going back,
Yes.
talking about the 10 tribes of Israel, that land was given to them, but there are two tribes, wasn't it, who decided not to go into the land of Israel, outside the land of Israel.
Yeah.
Now, how do they fit in with God's plan, should we say? Because they decided that the land was good, and they asked Joshua, or no, it's probably Moses then, if they could settle just outside.
Yeah, so we just learned about that yesterday.
Oh, right. Sorry, right. Well,
Yeah, so they eventually merged back into...
Well, they did, they merged back,
yeah.
right. I just...
So first the 10 lost tribes, if you look here, if you can see the timeline, this was in the year 423 BCE. So it was, and then about 100 years later, so the kingdom of Judah lasted about another 100 years after the 10 tribes were lost. And then eventually, so the 10 tribes exiled was in 556 BCE, and then the first temple was destroyed in 423 BC, so about over 100 years later. So that was the exile of Babylon. So the king was called Nebuchadnezzar, and he destroyed the first temple. Babylon is modern day Iraq. Okay, so they destroyed the first temple, and during that 70 years of exile after the destruction of the first temple, all the Jewish people went to Babylon. Okay, so Iraq. From then, many great Jewish communities stayed in Babylon. So, for example, the Talmud that we study is called the Babylonian Talmud, right? Because there was from already the destruction of the first temple, there was Jewish communities there, and that is when the story of Purim happened. Okay, so the story of Haman and Achashverosh, that happened during those 70 years between the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. So now going back to the story of the covenant that God made with Abraham. So it says that Abraham, the sun was setting and Abraham went to sleep. And as he was going to sleep, it says the sun was setting and a great dark dread fell upon him. And he fell asleep, and during his sleep, that's when he had the vision where God showed him that his descendants would go down to Egypt for 400 years, and then eventually they would be redeemed with great riches. So God was basically telling him everything that's going to happen to his children in the future history. But the Talmud explains that, what does it mean? Everything that happened, it's obviously happened literally, but also there's a meaning behind it. So when he fell asleep, it says there was a great dark dread fell upon him. Says the Talmud. So if you see, this is text 2.2. Over here, we allude to the 4 different empires that exiled the Jewish people. These 4 terms, we have dread, great, dark, dread, and then fell upon him. So the Talmud says, dread refers to the first exile of Babylon. Darkness refers to then the Persian exile. So what happened was after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, around 52 years later, they were conquered by the Persians, and that's where started the Persian Empire. And like I said, that was the time of when the story of Purim happened. And then there was Cyrus the Great granted the Jewish people permission to return to the land of Israel, and more than 40,000 Jews returned to begin the construction of the second temple. But then after Cyrus died, then came King Ahasuerus, story of Purim. He halted all permission to build the second temple, so construction was paused. But then, Ahasuerus married Queen Esther, who was Jewish, and they had a son who was Darius II. He became the next king, and he was Jewish because his mother was Esther. And he gave permission for the Jewish people to resume construction of the second temple. And that's when Ezra the scribe went back up with a whole other group of people back to Israel, and they continued building the second temple until it was completed in the year 349 BC. Go back to the timeline. Second temple was completed 349 BCE. Then, during the second temple, came the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire ended up falling to Alexander the Great. So then that led to the third. So altogether, there's 4 exiles. So we had first Babylon, the Babylonian exile, then the Persian exile, which was sort of they took over the Babylonians. Then came the Greeks. So Alexander the Great, he conquered over the land of Israel, and that is when the story of Hanukkah happened. During the time of the Second Temple, and after Alexander died, his empire was divided among his generals, and Israel was given over to one of the generals. And initially, in the beginning, he had very good relations with the Jewish people. But then King Herod came to power, and this is what you mentioned, that he killed many of the Jewish sages, and then eventually he felt bad. So to do tshuva, to do repentance, he gave permission. He actually went and renovated the second temple, made it more beautiful, because it wasn't as beautiful as the first initially, because they were very poor when they were coming up from exile. But he went and he really beautified it, and he expanded it, he renovated it, made it bigger. Together with that, he also built a few other famous structures, like the fortress of Masada, and also the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron, where the forefathers are buried. That big, beautiful building was also built by him. Then came, the Maccabees, the Maccabees were victorious over the Greeks. The Greek sort of faction that was governing over Israel. So their sort of the Maccabees, they became known as the Hasmoneans, right? As the school Hasmonean. So they're named after them. And they ruled over Israel for a while, but then there became very, unfortunately, within the Jewish community, within the Jewish people in Israel, there became sort of infighting. And as the Romans were getting sort of closer, there was fights between how to deal with the Romans. Some of the sages were saying that we better sort of cooperate with them because they're more powerful than us, and there's no way we can win over them. So we should. The Romans were giving them like exorbitant taxes and stuff like that, and they're saying we just need to acquiesce and just give them what they want so we can live in peace. But then there was the young zealots, the rebels, who were saying, no, we're going to fight at all costs. And it led to a big argument until, unfortunately, when this is coming closer to the destruction of the Second Temple, when the Romans were ready, the Emperor Nero, he sent his general Vespasian together with his son Titus to come destroy the Second Temple. And when they were surrounded, Jerusalem was surrounded, and they had sort of the stronghold in Jerusalem, but they had these warehouses of food because there was a siege on Jerusalem, but they had warehouses with food to keep them going for a long time. But the young rebels, they wanted to fight the Romans, so they burnt down the warehouses of food in order to force them to have no choice but to go, because they had no food left, to go and fight the Romans. Eventually, that's what led to the destruction of the Second Temple. So the first temple was destroyed because the Jewish people were corrupt. It says the idol worship, murder, and idolatry. Why was the Second Temple destroyed? The Jewish people were studying Torah, they were doing the commandments. It says it was destroyed because of baseless hate. In Hebrew, it's called sinat chinam, which means just hating one another just for no reason. Why was it destroyed? Baseless hate. So that was the fourth exile, which was called the Roman exile. That is essentially the exile that we're still in till today. So 2,000 years later, we're still in this exile. Now, what happened was there was still a Jewish community in Babylon, back from the first exile. So there was a small community of Jewish people who stayed in Israel, but the majority of Jewish people they started building these communities in other places. One of the main ones was back in Babylon, and that was the era of the Talmud. So first came the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written by Judah the Prince, Yehuda Anasi, and he did something very bold. There was always a law in the Torah that the written Torah will be written, but the oral Torah has to be verbally transmitted from teacher to student, because there has to be that sort of in-person connection, where the children come and learn from the students. So the explanations of the Torah, the oral Torah, was always given only passed down from generation to generation through they would come to study in the study houses. But Judah the Prince, he basically saw what's happening is Jewish people are being dispersed, they're being persecuted, they're being spread out, they're forgetting the ancient language of Hebrew. And if we don't capture the knowledge of the oral Torah, it will be forgotten forever. So he made this sort of big sort of decision to go almost violate a single commandment of writing down the oral Torah in order to preserve the entirety of the Torah. So he wrote down, and eventually that became, looking back, it became a really massive sort of like in hindsight, it was a very big correct decision that he made, because eventually that led to the whole era of the Talmud, where the rabbis, they had the written core text, and they were able to build up study houses and to learn and to learn, to expand and to debate. And that eventually led to the next era of the Amoraim, which was first the Mishnah, then the Talmud. And slowly Jewish people started dispersing and building these communities in further and further places away from Israel. So yeah, so Babylon was the central hub for over 400 years. But over time, Jewish communities developed in places like Germany, Italy, Spain, France, North of Africa, Yemen, the Balkans, and even the UK, right? So now we're going to actually speak about the two main ones, the two main groups, which is the Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Everyone knows Sephardi, Ashkenazi. So what does actually Sephard mean, and what does Ashkenaz mean? Do you know? Sephard is actually a country. Which country is Sephard? Sfarad. Spain. Sfarad in Hebrew is Spain. And Ashkenaz is also a country, is Germany, is Ashkenaz. So Spain was the main population. Now, it actually is very interesting. Spain has probably the oldest Jewish community that's still around today, because in Spain, there are people there from not the destruction of the second temple, but going way back to the destruction of the first temple. Already back then, there was a community in Spain. So if we jump ahead to see if I can find text 3.3. Yes, so you'll see here, Toledo and
how come my family, for example, are from Ashkenaz, also from Lithuania,
yes,
also from
Poland and Eastern Europe,
but also from Germany and Austria, like Bavaria.
Yeah.
And they were having a Siddur who says Sfarad. Like,
there was a lot of crossover. People would travel from one to the other, but these communities developed. So Deborah, do you want to read 3.3? Is your throat okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, okay.
Jews from the tribe of the river went to Spain following the destruction of the first temple. For Pyrrhus, the king of Spain, brought them there. He settled them in two regions. The first in Lucena, which was then a great city in Andalusia with the kingdom of Castile, and the second in the region of Toledo.
So this was the origins of the Spanish community, and eventually that expanded to places like North Africa and the Middle East as a whole. That became the Sephardic community. That was one main hub. And then the other one was Ashkenaz, which is both France and Germany. Ashkenaz itself means Germany, but it includes France and Germany. And then eventually that grew to also include the whole Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Poland, Russia, etc.
Would there be intermarriage between the two?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
little bit.
But yeah, there was, so actually very interesting on the topic of marriage. This is so many systems emerged traditions in these different communities, and a lot of it had to do with the culture and society that they lived in. Think of this: the Ashkenaz, they lived mostly in Christian Europe, where they went through periods of the Crusades, the pogroms. There was a lot of persecution. Whereas the Sephardim, they lived mostly in places where there was Muslim rule, which back then it was a lot more politically stable, and they were able to live at peace with their neighbors. And for example, many of the rabbis were doctors for the Muslim rulers, like the Rambam Maimonides, who was born in Spain and then went to Egypt. So there was many. So that led to many differences in the customs and the culture and the traditions of these different communities. So we're actually going to zoom in now on the customs of the wedding, the Jewish wedding, and to see the differences of how they do it by the Ashkenazim, and the reason why. So one of the famous ones is eating rice on Passover, or
That's the Farad and Ashkenaz is from the first temple destruction.
so mostly they emerged after the second temple destruction, but specifically Spain had a small community that was already there from the first temple, but it sort of the mainstream community started growing after way after, like more 500-600 years later, after the. So again, first there was the era of the Babylonian, 500 years. The main center of Jewish life was in Babylon. That was the Talmud, and after the Talmud was written, that was the final text that was agreed upon between all of Jews, was the Talmud. After that came the next periods of the rabbis, was called the Gaonim, and then the Rishonim and the Achronim. The Rishonim is the first rabbis, and once the Talmud was finished, the Talmud was something that all the Jewish people across the entire world agreed upon it, and that became sealed that this is Jewish law. Just to play back so the Mishnah is completed 190 of the Common Era, and the Talmud is sealed the year 500 of the Common Era. And the Rishonim, the era of the Rishonim, which is once they started, the Rishonim is already, they branched off. There was some big rabbis like Rashi. You know Rashi? He lived in France, so he was Ashkenaz. And then you had other big ones in Spain, and the Rambam Maimonides, he was a Sephardi. Now, eventually came time to compile everything together, because the Talmud is very complex. It's very, difficult to learn. And it came a time where the rabbis wanted to make things a little bit more simple and organized in a structured manner. So there were three great rabbis that had compiled sort of summaries of the Talmud. One of them was the Alpes, the Rif, and he lived in he lived in Spain. Yeah. So he lived in Spain, so he was Sephardi. Then there was the Rambam, who also was born in Spain and then fled to Egypt. He was also Sephardi. And the third one was the Rosh, who was from Germany. So he took these three sort of books of Jewish law, and he basically came up with this methodology. So the Shulchan Aruch is the code of the Jewish law. That's what we have today. So this is the origin of how it came about. He said, these are the three greatest of the Jewish scholars from both Ashkenaz and Sfard. So any ruling that there was a disagreement between any of them will follow the majority. So if 2 out of 3 of those 3 rabbis agreed on something, then he will do it. And that's what the Yosef Karo, who was born in Spain just before the 1492, when the Jewish people were expelled from Spain. He was a little child. He was like less than 10 years old, and his family moved to Israel, to Tzfat, northern Israel. And he grew up and became a very big sage. So that's when there was a big, the Jewish community grew in Tzfat. Now he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the code of the Jewish law. Not the Rif, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, his name was. Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now, but the problem is that because of these 3 rabbis that he was basing his book upon, 2 out of 3 of them were Sephardi. So there was so ultimately his rulings leaned towards Sephardi. Now, at that same time, there was another rabbi in Poland, in Krakow, Poland, named Rabbi Moshe Isserles in 1530. And he, unbeknownst to him, he didn't know that there was another rabbi trying to do the same project of compiling all the laws in an organized book. He was doing the same, but he was from Ashkenaz this community. And then that was I think the printing had just begun, and so one of his students sent him a copy of the Shulchan Aruch that his counterpart had written. So he made then a very sort of, he had this sort of thing. He was, he wanted to write it, but on the other hand, he was very sort of thoughtful, and he realized that if he were to write an Ashkenazic version of the Shulchan Aruch, that would ultimately create a very big divide among the Jewish people, where we have like two Torahs, and we don't want that. So he decided, actually, he made a very humble decision. He said, you know what? We're going to keep the Shulchan Aruch that the Karo wrote, but instead of making another Ashkenazi version, I'm just going to add footnotes with the Ashkenazi customs. And he called it the Mapal. So Shulchan Aruch, the word Shulchan Aruch means a set table. The reason why he called the Shulchan Aruch a set table is because everything is very organized, like a set table. It's like fed to you on a silver platter. So the Ramah, his footnotes he called the tablecloth, meaning this is like for the Ashkenazim. Anytime there was a different custom, he added it in footnotes, and then thanks to these two great rabbis, till today, this is the leading book of Jewish law, which incorporates both Sephardi and Ashkenazi customs all in one. And together that became the Shulchan Aruch. Now, so here we are. Oh, so I wanted to actually zoom in on one of the fascinating, one of the big, milestones of life is a marriage, and speak about the differences between the way they do it in the Sephardi communities and the Ashkenazi communities. So, where are we? So the famous thing of like a bride wearing a white gown. Most people, they date that to Queen Victoria, that she was the one who started the concept of brides wearing white gowns in the 1800s. However, it's not true, because it's brought down in Jewish books, in Ashkenazi books, 500 years earlier, the custom of a bride wearing a white gown. And the reason is because, so just generally speaking, the Ashkenazi wedding is a lot more serious, somber, whereas by the Sephardim, it's much more joyful and happy. So one of the things is we have the custom. So by Ashkenazim, the chuppah, which is the canopy, the custom is it's always done outdoors, under the sky. It's not done inside the synagogue. So a lot of the reasons for these customs is because, again, the Jewish people at that time were going through a lot of persecution from the Christians, and they didn't want to do anything that attracts too much attention. They didn't want trouble. They had enough trouble. Let's just be quiet and live and let live. And also they were very sensitive to not doing any things that will resemble looking like a Christian or like a church ceremony. So therefore they said, let the wedding not be in a synagogue, because then it might look too similar to a church wedding, and therefore let's do it outdoors, the chuppah. That's where the origin of doing the chuppah outdoors. And the custom is that the bride and groom fast on the day of the wedding, because it's a day that they're atoned. It's like Yom Kippur for the bride and groom, where they're atoned for all the sins of and they wear white. So the bride wears a white gown, and the groom wears what's called a kittel, which is like also what we wear on Yom Kippur, the kittel.
That represents purity.
Yes, it represents purity, which is reminding them about like what are the foundations of building up a family together, is having purity and good intentions. It's not about all the lavish gifts and whatnot and distractions. Whereas in the Sephardi communities, first of all, the bride would wear lots of colors. Also, another difference is, and the groom would wear a talit, which also can be colorful. Another difference is the ring. So in Ashkenaz, the custom is to wear a very plain golden band, no decorations, no diamonds, gold band. The reason is because if you have a diamond ring, then it can later arouse sort of questions that maybe she thought that it was worth more, and she got married on the assumption that the ring was worth more, and then she found out it was later, so maybe the marriage is not valid. So therefore they say, you know, just use a simple plain wedding band, you give the other fancy rings after. Whereas for the Sephardim, they said, no, it's not a problem. You can give whatever you want as long as it has value. Then you can give, it doesn't have to be a simple band. So these are again, so
To that.
halachically, it's allowed in the Sephardic.
The play, right?
Yes, yeah,
It's using silver as well, isn't it? Now, or white gold.
yeah. So if you think about again the context and the context and the culture that they were in, where the Sephardim they weren't being persecuted, so they were able to, you know, they were having more of a festive time, whereas Ashkenazim kept things very simple and quiet. The origin, what?
The whole life is like this.
Exactly. It's in the DNA. It's like imagine you take the same breed of birds and then you take one group of birds and you put them somewhere in a jungle where there's predators and there's cold winters, and you take another group and you put them on a sunny island where there's lots of food. 1,000 years later, the birds will have the same DNA, but they will eventually evolve to be very different. Same thing, all Jewish people, we've got the same DNA, we're all one family, and the core Torah is the same. We all have the exact same Torah. Yeah, but there is, you know,
Can I ask?
Yes.
The Ashkenaz, there is. I don't know if there's trope. You go on sites or you hear people talking about the land of Israel shouldn't be settled by Ashkenazi Jews.
yes,
They talk about a mass conversion of the Ashkenazim on true Jewish status. They were converted or something back.
so that's wrong. There's,
Yeah, that's what I'd like to.
yeah, there,
It's rubbish.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying is.
Oh, they should put thumbs down on
Well,
it. It's anti-Jew.
yeah.
Thumbs down.
Well, no,
you know, like,
So that- Yeah, I don't remember all the detailed theory behind it, but it's something like some people try to claim that Ashkenazi Jews have they come from they originate from a certain group of whatever, and it's not they're not the real something like that. Yes,
That's not all Ashkenazi Jews. That's the little subset of nasty people.
I just wanted.
And the complete true and honest, it's none of them are really Jews. It's the Khazar kingdom who wanted to become not Jewish, but like it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I know.
But they didn't want to take all the mixed both. But they didn't want the Islam and they didn't want
That's right.
the Christianity. But you know the book, the Akuzari,
yeah,
you know where it's kept, the original copy?
no,
In Oxford University Library.
Which
Oh.
one is this?
the Kuzar. It's like a debate between it's a fictional story, but it's a debate between a rabbi.
It's not fictional.
No, the story, the way that the book is written.
Yeah,
It's
but
writ-
it's written about.
No, it's real people. It's a real. It was written by a real person, but.
Yeah, yeah.
It was written for, I think, the Muslim king or something, the Khuzar king that wanted to. He wasn't Muslim, so it was a Muslim, a Jewish rabbi, and
The philosopher.
yeah,
It's amazing.
They're discussing what's right and what's wrong.
the Khuzari.
He basically asked, I think, first the philosopher, why you need to be a philosopher, because it's also a religion. And then he asked an imam or something,
Mhm.
why it's like to be this, and then he asked a rabbi.
Yeah.
And in the end, he decided to become sort of Jewish, but he didn't want to keep all the 613 mitzvot. So he wanted like the Israelite. He wanted to pick and choose whatever he wanted, but he said at the end that this is the true religion. Now the Christians have this book in order to have Christianity. Without this book, there wouldn't be any laws or reason to have Christianity, basically.
Because this book also has the arguments for Christianity.
Christianity.
Right.
Without this book, they wouldn't
Yeah.
have the reasons to have Christianity.
Well, yeah, I just going up, we've got
Yeah.
actually got lifelong learning, and we've been discussing anti-Semitism and the way Jews are portrayed in books over the years, and we went right back to is it William, who was a saint in Norwich, and they believe bloodline.
The first bloodline.
That's right, yeah. And we were talking about that. And it comes out that these monks and these Christian religious leaders had lots of Jewish sages with them, and they would discuss. They learned Hebrew, and they took a lot of advice. It wasn't as black and white as we
Even the
said.
Muslims,
mentioned-
even the Muslims up until today, Iran,
Yeah.
the Khomeini and the Khamenei had Jewish rabbis to consult. up to today. Up to
Really?
now. Yes. And that you know why the story from the Lubavitch rabbi in Iran that came a few years ago in Lubavitch in New York. He said the story.
Wow. Now you would think that Ashkenaz and Sephardi is something that only developed centuries later after the destruction of the Second Temple. But if you go back in the Bible itself, there's a prophecy about the Ashkenaz and Sephardi communities being developed. So look in text 3.1, Yaron, 3.1. This is from Ovadia from the Tanakh. Yaron, 3.1.
On the exile of the children of Israel were among the Canaanites as far as
Tzarfat.
Tzarfat, and the exile of Jerusalem that is in
Sfarad.
Sfarad shall inherit the cities of the Negev.
We're talking about the dispersion of the Jewish people being dispersed. Now read the next one. That's the commentary on this verse.
Tzarfat refers to the land known as France, and Sfarad refers to the land called Spain.
So ultimately, this is referring to the Tzarfat is France, which is Ashkenaz, and Sfarad is Spain, which is Sephard. So there's already the mention in the Torah that there's going to be the Jews will be dispersed into these two main groups. Now, it's important to also note, just to have a more complete picture, the Jewish people are not just divided into Sephardim and Ashkenazim. There were other smaller communities who were neither Sephard or Ashkenaz. So two examples over here was Provence, which was a community in South France. And they had their own unique customs, which were neither Sephardi or Ashkenaz. And there were some great rabbis that came from them. And the same thing, there was what's called the Romanites, that's the Balkans, Greece, and parts of Turkey. They had also, they were called the Bnei Romanaim, and they had also their own customs. So here brings like a custom in 3.5 about reading the Torah. Now we have a Baal Korah, the person who reads the Torah but if you go back times to the Talmud, the biblical times, not biblical, the Talmud times, each person that was called up to the Torah would read themselves their passage. But then people didn't know how to read. So then we introduced this concept of the Baal Korah, someone who reads for them. This concept started by the Bnei Romaim, and they had like a what's called like someone who stood next to them who was like a reading out for them the words with the tune, a prompter. That's it, a prompter. They had a prompter. So anyone who was not to shame anyone who didn't know how to read the Torah without the vowels. So there was a prompter who was always there, who was reading it for them. This is just one of the customs from the Romanaim, who they lived in the Greece and the Balkan area. So these were different groups of Jews who were neither.
I have this Ovadia.
Yeah.
So when would
it was a prophecy. This was written during during the first temple, somewhere around the first temple times.
So it's predicting.
It's predicting. It's a prophecy. Yes.
That far back. That's very
And there was a kingdom of Tzarfat and Sfarad
back then.
back then, or the name
No.
took from the Bible.
Yeah, the name. Yeah, exactly. But the names must have come from the Bible. This was before there was such countries existed.
And would these Romania Jews be where Romania is today?
Partially, yes. So this is
the Rome.
no, not connected to Romans.
Romania.
It's Turkey, Greece, Albania, Bulgaria, and parts of Romania and Hungary. It's Turkey, Greece, Albania, Bulgaria, and parts of Romania and Hungary. Okay,
Should I get the maximum line?
Yeah.
so it's not to be confused with the Romans.
Yeah.
Now, this is actually a good point to mention. Maybe you want to tell us, Stuart, the history of the Jewish people in Britain.
Well,
It's not written here, but
most of it came over in 1066 with William the Conqueror because they financed his war, and it was very expensive, and they were just about put up with.
At school history, you're going to get a lot. You need to explain.
Oh right, sorry. You know that this was a country ruled by the Anglo-Saxons, which remember that Anglo-Saxon was quite interesting later on, and then William the Conqueror was a Norman, Viking Norman, came over at the Battle of Hastings and took over the land. right? So and he brought Jews with him, and then they became merchants, money lenders, and what? But yeah, they financed the invasion of England as it was then. Wow.
Because Christians were not allowed to be money lenders.
That's right.
So the Jews, they were basically the money lenders.
You know how expensive it is to mount a war. So there were probably other people involved in financing him as well. But they came out and they lived here. And then about, is it 1291?
So 1290, yeah, 1290, the Edward the First.
Lots of the kings and the higher ups have got into a great deal of debt and they had the Jews money, right? So a good way of getting rid of them, because they're the terms Christ killers as well, and they shouldn't have them. They were expelled.
And which day of the year were the Jewish people expelled from England?
Are you probably 9th of Av?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
The 9th of Av, the Jewish people were expelled in 1290 from England.
Anyway, so right, well, we go back. Remember the angle. So there was no Jew. Shakespeare wrote about Shylock. You know Shylock, the money lender. You know Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare. That's very famous. But
You'll come across
he portrays the Jew as you know. Although it does have some sympathy. He said, "Have you heard the thing that am I not a man? If you cut me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh?" Well, that's Shakespeare, but it represents Shylock for the pound of flesh. But, anyway, doesn't matter. But Shakespeare probably never met a Jew because there was only a few Jews in this country that ever had. Although there was some because Elizabeth I had a doctor who was Jewish. Anyway, go back to when we had the English Civil War, and Cromwell was the leader of the country, and he was a devoutly religious Puritan Christian. And Rabbi, I think, was Ben Manasseh, came over from Holland.
Rabbi Menashe ben Israel.
That's it, Manasseh ben Israel, thank you. Came over from Holland and met.
Accessibility shortcuts.
I met him and said, "Look, you're waiting for the Messiah to come. And it says in the Bible, you should not get the Messiah to return until the Jews are in every corner of the earth." And he said, "This is Anglo-Saxon. It's an angle. It's a corner of the earth." So Cromwell, very, very religious man, said, "Right, we'll have the Jews back here." And that's when Jews returned. Cromwell.
Oliver Cromwell.
Sorry.
So that's when the Jewish people came back to the UK. Fast forward till today, we have. So that was in the year 1656. Fast forward till today, there's over 312,000 Jewish people in the UK. Over 312,000.
What is that, 250?
Well, I don't know.
Always-
According to
yeah,
Google.
always be good.
According to Google, yeah.
Yeah,
Right now, this is a very fascinating story. I have to say, I didn't know this story myself. How the Jewish people came to America. Most people, they think, oh, Ellis Island, in the 1800s. But no, it was way back. So here's a fascinating story. Now, thanks to AI, I used a bit of AI to take the story and turn it into a video for you guys. Well, you'll tell me how good the AI is. So here's the video.
All right, let's jump right in. We're traveling back to the 1630s for a wild, high-stakes adventure that honestly gets completely overlooked in most history classes. We're talking about the origins of the very first Jewish community in the New World. And this isn't just your standard story about moving from point A to point B. It's a dramatic, intense tale of survival, shifting empires, and building a community against literal all odds. So around the year 1630, the Dutch capture parts of northeastern Brazil. This includes the city of Recife. And within just a few years, a massive Jewish community takes root there. We're talking over 1,000 people. To put that into perspective for you, by 1640, the Jewish population in this Dutch-controlled territory was actually almost double the Christian population. They founded a synagogue called Kahal Zor Israel and quickly thrived as merchants, doctors, and craftsmen. They became so central to the city's economy that the main commercial thoroughfare in Recife simply became known as the Street of the Jews.
Imagine
it was this bustling, vibrant center of trade where the community really flourished.
And what's crazy is the level of freedom they had. You have to remember, a lot of South America at this time was controlled by Spain and Portugal and living under the terrifying shadow of the Inquisition. But Dutch rule, total game changer. Jewish business owners openly closed all their stores on the Street of the Jews for Shabbos. And this actually horrified visiting Catholic officials who were totally unaccustomed to seeing Judaism practiced so publicly and confidently. This whole golden era really peaked around 1642, which is when Rabbi Yitzhak Abab de Fonseca arrived to lead the community. But as you can probably guess, this golden era doesn't last. In 1654, the Portuguese reconquer Recife, and just like that, the freedom they had under the Dutch vanishes. To avoid the Inquisition, the Jewish community has to desperately flee. The rabbi heads back to Amsterdam, and over 600 Jews are just scattered, searching for safety, bringing this sudden, heartbreaking end to their time in Brazil.
And that brings us to some serious peril on the high seas. While many did make it back to Europe safely, one specific small group of refugees had a journey that went disastrously off course. Here's what happens. After fleeing Recife, this small group's ship is attacked and completely robbed by a Spanish privateer. They're stripped of absolutely everything and left totally stranded and helpless in the Caribbean. With zero way to cross the Atlantic to Europe, their only option is to board a small French vessel heading north, just praying they find a safe harbor. Eventually, that French vessel brings them to New Amsterdam, the harbor of the colony that would one day become New York City. They arrive exhausted, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, just days before the new year of Rosh Hashanah. But if they thought the nightmare was over, they were about to get a very cold welcome. Enter the colony's governor, Peter Stuyvesant. He was fiercely anti-Semitic and absolutely determined to drive them right back out. He seizes what little property they have left to pay for their passage and even throws 2 members of the group in jail over the dispute. He literally wrote to his superiors calling them a repugnant race who would infect his colony. So it becomes this intense battle of wills. Stuyvesant uses every oppressive tactic in the book. He bans them from the local militia, slaps them with special taxes, and constantly tries to limit their rates. But you know what? The refugees push back. They leverage the fact that many Jewish investors held significant stakes in the Dutch West India Company, the very company that owned the colony. The company actually overrules Stuyvesant and forces him to let the refugees settle. Led by fierce pioneers like Astor Levy, they fight every single restriction and win battle after battle. And it all comes down to this incredibly small number, 23. Out of everyone who fled Brazil, the group that washed ashore in New Amsterdam was exactly 23 exhausted, robbed, but remarkably resilient men, women, and children. They absolutely refused to be driven away. And from those original 23 refugees grew Sherith Israel, which translates to the remnant of Israel. It became the very first Jewish congregation in North America, founded right there in Manhattan. From fleeing the Portuguese to surviving pirates to outlasting an oppressive governor, their sheer determination literally laid the foundation for what would become one of the largest Jewish communities in the entire world.
Isn't that amazing? Very fascinating story. Very from 23 people.
How many Jewish only in New York?
Now? A lot.
There's an interesting thing there. They talk about pirates, but you know they were Jewish pirates.
Were they?
Well, what happened was Spain expelled. Spain expelled them, so they went further and further away, but they wanted to go to Spanish-speaking places. So naturally, they went towards the Caribbean, slowly but surely.
All right, let's.
And what they found the best thing to do, what better way of getting back at the Spanish than raiding their ships, their gold ships, so they became Jewish pirates.
Interesting.
Wow.
They saw an opportunity. So,
Wow, 23 people needs to be sort of very
Well,
rebellion.
I mean,
How would you survive? Only 23 people.
All right.
So we're then Israel Jews from India. 14 of us came. Again, 14 people. That's how. Yeah, that's how we were populated in India. Less.
Wow.
And what I've also discovered recently, just from meeting everyone, when I've lots of places, I'm quite chilled. Well, in India, we didn't suffer any persecution.
That's right.
And I now realise why my family are like they are. And it's because we don't have any persecution. I've got an agreement with the, I should have bought it for you, you'd be interested. I've got an agreement with the rabbi in Delhi. So it's an agreement between the Hindus and Jews that Jews will not be persecuted. You've probably heard Modi talking, Prime Minister of Israel, of India.
He came to visit Israel.
Yeah.
He says about other groups of Jews, and it always says, you know, we stand with Israel.
Yeah.
And everyone always think that I obviously know that because we never had the problem.
Stand with Israel, but they also stand with Iran and Russia and China.
Quite right.
With the currency.
They're sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
The people around us.
All right, so now,
All of Iran also.
Well, to your face.
so this is the most important part of the whole class. Now the last part is, what is the purpose in all of this? So in other words, what's the deeper meaning? Why did God have to do this to spread the Jewish people far and wide and go through all of this? So on a very surface level, we say, oh, it's a punishment. You know, the Jewish people sinned, they got exiled. The Rebbe actually proves logically that there has to be a deeper meaning. Why? Imagine it's a punishment and we're sort of paying off debt. So naturally, imagine you have, you know, 100,000 pounds debt. As time goes on and you pay it off, the debt should become smaller and smaller over time. So if the exile was just paying off sort of this punishment for the sins, then over time, over the years and the centuries, it should have got easier and easier, smaller and smaller. Yet we have the Holocaust, you know, the worst of worst happens. So there must be something deeper that's happening and that's at play here. So this is really, really powerful, hopefully transformational idea. So it goes back to the Talmud that says in 4.1, it says, based on a verse, that God did an act of kindness by spreading the Jewish people among the nations. Act of kindness, how could that be? So the Rashi explains, because that way they could never be all destroyed at once. If all the Jewish people, we're in 4.1, if all the Jewish people would be in one place, then any sort of, you know, Ayatollah can just come, put a nuclear bomb, the end of it, that's the end of them. But now the fact that the Jewish people are dispersed in all four corners of the world, it's almost impossible to annihilate the Jewish people. It's almost like diversifying your portfolio. So, you know, if something happens here, you've got the other stuff there. That's the very basic explanation to this passage. But again, there's deeper explanation. What does it mean? Also spiritually. When Jewish people are in different places, then we can spiritually support each other. So when, let's say, for example, during the communist Russia, the Iron Curtain, when people were being oppressed in Russia, but then you've got the Jews in America who are supporting them spiritually and physically. So it's also a spiritual thing. When Jewish people are in different places and they're going through hard times in one place, Jewish people in another place can support them both physically, materially, and also spiritually by doing the mitzvot, which they can't do there. And it's almost like the Jewish people are like a body. When, you know, you've got something wrong in the head, you know, it affects the foot, but all the different parts of the body affect each other.
Can we do a mitzvah for other people? Can we, you know?
Yeah, sure.
That's
Absolutely.
so,
Now,
so you can say Kaddish for somebody else.
yeah, sure.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, now I'm just going to sort of hopefully blow your minds a bit.
Okay, to a Avrech or to somebody to do the mitzvah for you, right? You know, you can pay an Avrech to say Kaddish every day.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, but people do it.
Yeah.
So now, here's something. Yeah, if exile was just a punishment, it should be shrinking, but really it grew.
Yeah.
Now, here's a fascinating thing. If exile was just consequence of human failure, it was just a punishment. We said that it would be getting smaller over time, right? There has to be a deeper thing. So how that works is that maybe a particular exile, like the destruction of the temple, came because of a sin. But the general concept that the Jewish people are going to be scattered among the four corners of the earth, that was built, it was part of the divine plan that the Jewish people should be spread out throughout the nations. Why is that? So just to give you a bit of a pop, you know, not a pop quiz, but like a very short Kabbalah idea. There's this concept called Shvirat HaKelim, which means the breaking of the vessels. What does that mean? Before this physical world was created, God was sort of playing. He was in the lab, in the spiritual creation lab. He was playing with all of his spiritual things. And he created spiritual worlds sort of before this world. He was like experimenting, so to say. And there's this concept called light and vessels. So the light, so imagine you have like a cup and then you pour water in a cup. If you don't have a cup, the water has nowhere to go. So the purpose of the cup is to hold the water. And let's say take a human being. We have sight, we see from our eyes. Is it the eyeball itself that's seeing? No, you've got what's called the power that the soul has to see, but without a physical eyeball, it can't see. But an eyeball itself isn't what sees, because you can have a dead person who has a complete eyeball and he can't see. So it's not the eyeball itself that sees, it's the live person who sees, but he needs the eyeball. Or let's say take a torch. You've got the batteries. The battery is like the light, but the torch is like the vessel that through the power, the electricity can only function if you have the vessel, which is like the torch to be, so this is the concept of light and vessels. Light is like the electricity, the power, and then the vessel is what it actually what it uses to be able to be materialized, to be actualized, to manifest. Okay, so God created this world where there was too much light and the vessels were too small. And what that caused was the vessels smashed, they shattered. It's all spiritual terms. It's okay. Now what happened was these sparks fell down and they into this world and they became embedded in the four corners of the world. Imagine like there's a big explosion and it's sort of the sparks go everywhere. Okay, this is all again spiritual ideas, but we're just using physical terms for spiritual ideas. What that means is basically that in the four corners of the world there are these sparks. The sparks are the godly sparks that makes everything be alive, but they need to be elevated. When all of them will be elevated, then the Mashiach will come. How do we elevate the sparks? By taking something and then using it for a positive purpose. We elevate it. When you take, cup and you use it, you share, you make a blessing, you eat whatever it is, you do a mitzvah, you use this table, which is wood, it comes from a tree, but use it to, have guests and share and study on, whatever, then we're elevating the table. Everything we do, if we're doing it for a good purpose, we elevate the material objects that we're using, and that is how we elevate the sparks. Now, in order, again, this is the divine purpose, is that all the sparks should be elevated. If the Jewish people would only be in Israel, then all these sparks from the four corners of the world wouldn't be elevated. There would be no way for them to be elevated. Our job is to be spread apart in the world and also to create our own customs and cultures that are based on the societies that we're in, whether it's Spain or the Balkans or North Africa or the Jewish people who came to Brazil, and all these places, and they developed the different customs of the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, and this and that, and the different languages. You've got Ladino and Yiddish and this and that, and there are languages that are very much influenced by the culture that they lived in. And that by doing that, you elevate the entire culture that you live in, the style of clothing, the dress, how look about how Jewish people dressed throughout the centuries and how that evolved and changed. By doing all of that, we elevate the different sparks of the world. So just to conclude with a story, there was around 300 years ago, there was the third Chabad Rebbe was called Tzemach Tzedek, and he lived there during Tsarist Russia, where the Jewish people, again, of course, were being persecuted. They were very poor and etc. And one of his disciples comes to him and he says, "You know what? My lifelong dream was I want to retire and I want to go up to Israel. I want to have your blessing for me to go to Israel." It says that to him, the Tzemach Tzedek in Yiddish, "Machda Eretz Yisrael, make this place Israel." So he told him, "No, don't go to Israel. Your job is to stay here, but bring Israel, bring the spirituality from Israel to where you are. That's your job." So all of us are doing. What that means is, imagine, let's say, take a military lingo. You have, the big army, which is, let's just say that, that's Israel, that's the hub. But then you have these posts where, you got soldiers who have the posts in different areas, and that is what the Jewish people here are around the world. Our jobs, we're like these soldiers and we've got these posts, whether it's in Surrey or in Brazil, and our job is like, we're all part of one army. We're all part of one sort of mission, and each of us have a purpose. So if everyone would just go into Israel, the rest of the world would be left behind, and it wouldn't be transformed and elevated. When the right time will come, when the mission will be completed, then we will all go to Israel, and Mashiach will come. Up until then, of course, part of the mission is also to do work in Israel itself, but there is the whole globe. As all of us, the reason whatever the divine providence led us to be, when we're here in Surrey, and that means that's where our job is to be here and do good stuff here. And by doing that, we are transforming. We're making here Israel. What does it mean, making here Israel? Israel is summarized by, if you read, this is the last quote on which one is it? Israel is a place where God says, that eyes of God are upon Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That's the verse. The eyes of God are always watching over Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Meaning to say, is a spiritual awareness. That's what Israel represents. Israel represents a godly spiritual awareness from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. What does it mean, make here Israel? It means that we should bring this spiritual awareness to the places that we are. Chobham, Addleston, West Byfleet, you name it. America, Brazil, Siberia, Poland, wherever the Jewish people were throughout history, their job was to then bring the spiritual awareness to those places. And Jewish people, they've even like materially and scientifically, they've really, like you said, they financed, you know, the whole UK, the British, you know, they've done great things. But our job isn't done until we finish elevating all the sparks. And when we finish doing that, then we will all be able to go back to the anchor, which is Israel. Third temple will be built, and the purpose of the diaspora will be completed.
Wow, this is something new. It's a chidush for me.
Which idea? Of why we are in the diaspora.
Yeah. We have a role in the diaspora.
We have a role, yeah. We're not just here because we're, you know, we're too, you know, we don't.
And is the purpose of that to bring the Messiah back?
Yes. Yeah, that's the ultimate purpose, yeah.
But by doing that and being really good people ourselves, are we not achieving Messiah ourselves?
Yeah.
To be with, because personally, I don't think we have one person who will be the Messiah. It's
So yeah,
to have the Messiah within us.
yeah, that is true as well. We believe that. I believe that too. I believe it's both.
Yeah.
In other words, there's the Messiah. Every one of us have the Messiah in us, and the world will come to a state of Messiah. We do also believe there will be an individual Messiah, but it's not down to just an individual. It's like the King David will come back, you know, the descendant of King David. Ben, I'm going to end the recording. I hope
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Right, I'll take that.